It wasn't just a campaign of shipwrecks. It was a systematic execution. How did the most powerful industrial machine in human history, a nation that had just vowed to become the arsenal of democracy, manage to lose its lifeblood to a handful of men hiding in the jungles of the Southern Hemisphere? Why did the Atlantic Ocean become a graveyard of burning steel and oil, while the world's most elite investigators looked in the wrong direction? And why were the lives of thousands of merchant sailors left to dangle by a thread? A thread held by a woman the system refused to acknowledge. But that was only the surface. History remembers the roar of the torpedoes, but it forgot the quiet scratch of a pencil. While the FBI stood in the spotlight, the true war was being fought in a paper-strewn office by a woman named Elizebeth Smith Friedman. She was the one mind that saw the pattern in the chaos. A codebreaker the generals dismissed as a clerk. A genius the patriarchy tried to bury in the footnotes. Why did the American military machine ignore the only mind that could stop the slaughter? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of the underdog. January 1942. Washington, D.C. is a city paralyzed by a cold, gray fear. The smoke from Pearl Harbor has barely cleared, and the American spirit is brittle, shaking from a blow it never saw coming. On the surface, the massive system is in motion. J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, paces his mahogany-lined office. He is the personification of the American establishment, rigid, loud, and obsessed with the theater of power. He wants public arrests. He wants flashbulbs and headlines. He treats the hunt for Nazi spies like a street brawl, a blunt instrument swinging at shadows. But while Hoover blusters, the Atlantic is bleeding. Off the coasts of Brazil and Argentina, the horizon is frequently lit by the orange glow of dying ships. Merchant vessels carrying the fuel, the food, and the hope of the Allied cause are being picked off with surgical precision. The U-boats are not hunting by luck. They are being guided by an invisible hand. Deep in the South American interior, the Nazi Abwehr has woven a web. It is a network of radio transmitters hidden in suburban attics and humid port town warehouses. They watch. They listen. They transmit the departure times and coordinates of every Allied hull that leaves the harbor. To the military giants in Washington, this threat is a ghost. They look for battleships on the horizon, but they cannot see the radio waves vibrating through the very air they breathe. In a nondescript office, far from the mahogany and the metals, sits Elizebeth Smith Friedman. She is surrounded by stacks of intercepted transmissions, thousands of scraps of paper covered in meaningless jumbles of letters. To anyone else, this is noise. To the FBI, it is a clerical burden. But Elizebeth doesn't see letters. She sees the ghost in the machine. She sees the rhythm of a human heartbeat behind the code. She knows that every spy has a fist, a unique way of tapping out Morse code that acts as a digital fingerprint. While the system screams in panic, Elizebeth sits in the dark, holding the silence that will eventually save them. The internal struggle is suffocating. Her husband, William, is the legendary codebreaker of the Army, currently collapsing under the weight of breaking the Japanese purple code. Elizebeth must maintain the household, support her husband's crumbling mental health, and, in the cracks of her day, dismantle the greatest intelligence threat in the Western Hemisphere. The Bureau doesn't provide her with a staff of elite analysts, They give her a desk and expect her to stay quiet. They believe the Bolivar network, the Nazi spy ring, is too sophisticated for a civilian woman to grasp. They claim the Nazi Enigma machines are unbreakable because the manuals say so. But the Bolivar agents are growing arrogant. They believe the South Atlantic is their private hunting ground. They treat the ocean as a vacuum where no one is listening. They are about to learn that physics and mathematics have no respect for their master race ideology. Radio transmission is like a shout in a crowded room. If you know how to listen, you can ignore the noise and find the one voice that matters. But the Nazis used the Enigma, a mechanical maze of gears and wiring that scrambled common German into a chaotic salad of letters. To the untrained eye, it was gibberish. To Elizabeth, it was a lock waiting for its key. While the FBI celebrates the arrest of a few low-level thugs in New York, Elizabeth is tracking the real hammer. She has identified a transmitter in Buenos Aires that is communicating directly with the German High Command. She warns her superiors. She tells them the Bolivar network is expanding, that a massive coordinated strike against Allied shipping is being organized from the shadows of South America. The representative of the establishment, a man defined by his rank and his polished boots, looks at her report and offers a thin, mocking smile. "Mrs. Friedman," he says, his voice dripping with the crystallized arrogance of the era, "the FBI handles the spies. You just provide the translations. Don't worry your head about the strategy. The Bureau has everything under control." He believes the quiet in the South Atlantic is a sign of his own success. He treats the absence of immediate disaster as a victory of his protocol. But he has fatally underestimated the boss. The Nazi Abwehr isn't retreating. It is calibrating. The silence isn't peace. It is the indrawn breath of a predator. And as the sun sets over the Atlantic, 30 Allied ships are steaming toward a coordinated ambush that only Elizabeth knows is coming. July 1943. The humidity in Washington, D.C. has become a physical weight, thick enough to stall the breath in your lungs. Inside the Coast Guard headquarters, the air is stagnant, smelling of floor wax and the metallic tang of overheated vacuum tubes. In a nondescript room, away from the grand strategy maps of the Pentagon, Elizabeth Smith Friedman is at war. But her weapons are not steel. They are a sharpened pencil, a grid of paper, and a silence so profound it feels like a prayer. While the massive system outside the generals, the admirals, the directors scrambles to react to the latest disaster, Elizabeth is doing something they cannot conceive of. She is listening to the personality of the enemy. The Nazi Abwehr agents in South America believe they are protected by the Enigma. To the uninitiated, the Enigma is a mechanical god. It is a typewriter-sized box of rotors and electrical circuits that takes a simple German word and scatters it into millions of possible combinations. Think of it like a set of spinning gears in a clock. But every time you press a key, the gears shift, changing the logic of the entire machine. It is a black box of absolute secrecy. The input is a coordinate. The fatal flaw is the human who types it, and the output is a torpedo striking a hull in the dark. But Elizabeth knows a secret the mathematicians have overlooked. A machine is only as perfect as the man operating it. She begins to notice patterns, not just in the letters, but in the mistakes. One operator in Buenos Aires always starts his morning transmission with a specific greeting to his girlfriend. Another in Rio has a fist, a rhythmic hesitation in his Morse code, a stutter in the fingertips that betrays his anxiety. She isn't just breaking a code, she is decoding a human soul. While J. Edgar Hoover is busy staging press conferences to announce the capture of dangerous saboteurs, who often turn out to be nothing more than disgruntled immigrants with a radio, Elizabeth is mapping the entire Bolivar network. She knows the names, the locations, and the bank accounts of every Nazi spy from the Caribbean to Cape Horn. She sees the ghost in the machine, while the establishment screams about the invisible threat. Elizabeth is already in the dark with them, holding the thread that will unravel their entire world. But the friction of the system is relentless. She walks into a briefing room, her arms heavy with decrypted cables that prove a massive shipment of industrial diamonds essential for the Nazi war machine is being smuggled out of Brazil. She presents her findings to a commander whose uniform is crisp, his ego even crisper. He doesn't look at the papers, he looks at her pearls. "Mrs. Friedman," he says, his voice a drone of crystallized arrogance. "We appreciate the clerical assistance, but these matters of international espionage require the firm hand of the Bureau. A woman's intuition is a fine thing for a parlor game, but we are fighting a war of men." He treats her genius as a hobby. He believes the system's protocol is a substitute for her insight. He dismisses the warning because the source doesn't have a badge or a bayonet. But history is a cruel judge of pride. The commander believes the South American coast is secure because the FBI said so. He treats the lack of an immediate explosion as proof of his own competence. But he has fatally underestimated the hammer. The Nazi spies aren't resting. They are preparing a great plan, a coordinated strike to cut the throat of the Allied supply line. While the commander pours himself a scotch, celebrating a security that doesn't exist, 1,000 miles away, a Nazi radio operator taps out a final confirmation. The trap is set, and the only person who sees the blade falling is the woman the commander just dismissed. The cognitive bridge for Elizabeth wasn't found in a mathematics textbook. It came from her past as a scholar of Shakespeare. Years before the war, she had been hired to find hidden ciphers in the works of the great bard. She learned then that language is a mirror of the mind. While the experts in Washington saw the Enigma as a complex mechanical problem, Elizabeth saw it as a literary one. To her, the code was a story the Nazis were telling themselves, a story of invincibility. And she knew that every story has a weakness. The experts saw complexity. Elizabeth saw a pattern of human arrogance. She returns to her desk. She doesn't argue. She doesn't scream. She simply picks up her pencil. She begins to feed the Nazis' own pride back to them. She realizes that by intercepting and subtly altering the flow of information, she can turn the Bolivar network into a weapon against itself. But she is working in a vacuum. Her husband, William, the man who broke the Japanese codes, is being hollowed out by the same system. He is a ghost in their own home, haunted by the secrets he cannot share even with her. They sit at the dinner table in a silence that screams. Two of the greatest minds in history, living under the same roof, forbidden by the massive system from comforting each other. The irony is a jagged pill. Elizabeth is saving the lives of thousands of sailors, yet she cannot save her own husband from the weight of the silence they both serve. By late 1943, the Bolivar network feels invincible. Their lead agent in Buenos Aires, a man who believes himself a master of shadows, sends a smug transmission back to Berlin. He mocks the stupid Americans who are searching the docks while he transmits from a villa right under their noses. He believes the silence of the Atlantic is his greatest achievement, but he is ignoring the terrifying reality. The silence isn't submission, it's a net. Elizebeth has finished her map. She has the frequency, the location, and the names. She has the black box open. She knows exactly when the hammer is supposed to fall. But as she prepares to hand over the final, crushing evidence, she realizes the system has one more betrayal in store for her. The FBI, sensing a major victory, is moving in, not to support her, but to take the stage. They are about to trigger a series of loud public arrests that will alert every Nazi agent in the hemisphere. They are choosing a headline over a victory. The arrogance of the system is about to warn the very enemy Elizebeth has spent years cornering. And as the FBI agents check their service revolvers and wait for the cameras to flash, the entire Bolivar network is seconds away from vanishing into the fog of the jungle, taking their secrets with them. 1944. The atmosphere in Washington is electric, but it is a static charge, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up just before the lightning strike. The massive system is finally ready to move, but it does not move with the surgical precision of the codebreaker's pencil. It moves with the heavy, clumsy stomp of a combat boot. J. Edgar Hoover, a man whose ambition is as polished as his mahogany desk, sees the finish line, and he wants to cross it alone. He wants the cameras. He wants the headlines that scream of G-men smashing the Nazi fifth column. He orders the mass arrests. Across South America, from the bustling docks of Rio to the quiet German-speaking suburbs of Buenos Aires, the FBI and their local counterparts kick down doors. It is a theatrical production. It is loud. It is violent. It is designed to be seen. But in her quiet, paper-strewn office, Elizebeth Smith Friedman feels a cold, hollow dread. She knows that a spy ring is like a hydra. If you chop at the heads without understanding the heart, you only teach the beast how to hide. She had warned them. She had told the Bureau that the Bolivar network was deeper than they realized, that by moving too fast, they would flush the most dangerous agents into the shadows of the jungle, where they could never be found again. The representative of the establishment had laughed. "Mrs. Friedman," he had said, "we aren't looking for patterns anymore. We're looking for prisoners." He prioritized the procedure over the truth. He chose the headline over the victory. And for a moment, the world held its breath. The Nazi agents who escaped the initial dragnet scrambled. They burned their code books. They smashed their transmitters. They fled into the interior, becoming ghosts in a landscape the Americans didn't understand. But there was one thing the Bolivar agents didn't realize. Elizebeth wasn't just tracking their radios. She was inside their minds. While the FBI was busy counting the handcuffs, Elizebeth was back at her desk, working in a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. She knew that even in their panic, these men would revert to their habits. Arrogance is a difficult trait to shed. The Nazi operators believed that once the loud Americans had their prisoners, they would stop looking. They believed their backup encryption, the most complex Enigma settings yet, was an impenetrable wall. They were wrong. Elizabeth didn't see a wall. She saw a mirror. She saw the reflection of their desperation in the way they scrambled their messages. She saw the ghost in the machine one last time. By the time the dust of Hoover's raids had settled, Elizabeth had already decrypted the final, desperate transmissions of the survivors. She had the names of the stay-behind agents. She had the coordinates for the secret U-boat refueling points off the coast of Patagonia. She had dismantled the heart of the network while the men were still arguing over who got to keep the captured flags. The war in the Atlantic didn't end with a single massive explosion. It ended with a whimper, a slow, steady starvation of information. The U-boats, deprived of their South American eyes, began to wander blindly into the sights of Allied destroyers. The wolf packs were broken, not just by depth charges, but by the fact that they no longer knew where their prey was hiding. Then, May 1945, the bells of victory ring across the world. The massive system takes its bow. In a grand hall in Washington, the lights are blinding. The air is thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and the sweat of powerful men. J. Edgar Hoover stands before a forest of microphones. He is the personification of the victor. He tells the American public a story of bureau brilliance. He claims that the FBI alone broke the Nazi spy rings. He takes the intelligence that Elizabeth harvested with her bare mind and presents it as a trophy of his own organization. He looks into the cameras and lies with the confidence of a man who knows that the records will remain buried for 50 years. And Elizabeth, she is not in the hall. She is not on the stage. She is back in her office, packing her things. The system has handed her a non-disclosure agreement. It is a document of silence, a legal cage that forbids her from ever claiming her own genius. She is told that her work is classified, a word the establishment uses to bury the people it finds inconvenient. The bitter aftertaste of this victory is a jagged pill. She had saved the lives of thousands of sailors. She had outthought the most sophisticated killing machine in history, and her reward was erasure. She returns to her home, to a husband whose own mind has been hollowed out by the same secrets. They sit together in the quiet of a post-war America, two of the greatest minds the world has ever known, living as strangers to their own history. A junior officer, a man who knows only the official reports, sees her leaving the Coast Guard building for the last time. He stops her, his voice dripping with that crystallized arrogance of the uninformed. What was it like, Mrs. Friedman, spending the whole war doing the filing while the men were out winning it? Elizabeth looks at him. She sees the medals on his chest that she helped him earn. She sees the life in his eyes that she protected with her silence. She doesn't scream. She doesn't correct him. She simply offers a thin, tired smile and says, "The filing was necessary." She walks away, becoming a ghost in her own lifetime. Do we see this same hubris today? We live in an era of massive systems, algorithms, and corporations that claim to be the architects of our world. We see the faces on the screens, the Hoovers of the modern age, claiming credit for every breakthrough. But how many Elizabeths are currently sitting in the shadows? How much of our safety is built on the invisible labor of those the system finds it easier to ignore than to acknowledge. We celebrate the loud, we reward the visible, but the true hinges of history are forged in silence. The cruel irony of Elizebeth Smith Friedman is that her greatest victory was her own disappearance. She succeeded so completely that the world forgot she ever existed. It took decades for the Kapau's top secret stamps to dry and fall off. It took a new generation of historians to pry open the boxes in the National Archives and find the scratch of her pencil on the pages that changed the world. She was the mind that saw through the machine, and the machine responded by trying to delete her. But history has a long memory. The truth doesn't stay buried. It just waits for someone to listen to the silence. If you believe that stories like Elizabeth's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing, To help us uncover the rest of the story, please subscribe. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.